Okay, so this is my second attempt to try and record this. Hopefully this goes better. Um, I wanted to make this video to go over um, my what I hope to be my thesis topic, um, an asymptotic view of hell. Um, Uh, and so that name might be confusing to people. It will probably make sense once I start talking about these graphs here. Um, Other potential names that I've thought up for this view would be like the diminishing view or the waning view. Basically, because it is just that um, in hell, as time extends out into eternity, your level of consciousness diminishes and wanes over times, but never reaches zero. I'll talk more about that structure here in a bit. Um, so, why did I come up with this view? So, the two main competing views right now are the traditionalist view and the conditionalist view. Um, and if you make me pick between the two of them, I'm probably going to go with the traditionalist view. Um, the traditionalist view is that there is eternal conscious torment, right? So, always conscious goes on forever, and there's punishment. Part of the reason why I would pick this view is because I think that the biblical data for showing that hell is infinite in duration, uh, I think I think you really can't go against that. That seems to be 100% correct to me. Um, but the issue that a lot of people have with the traditionalist view is that it goes against our moral intuitions about it being infinite in punishment. Um, you can only commit a finite amount of sin in life. And so it seems unjust to people that there is an infinite amount of punishment for a finite amount of sin. The way that most people get around this, um, if you look at like your William Lane Craig or C.S. Lewis, people like that, Um, typically, you'll hear kind of one of two arguments. Um, Either it's that once somebody is in hell, they will continue to sin. Therefore, they are not being punished infinitely for a finite amount of sin. They're being punished infinitely for an infinite amount of sin. Um, uh, I and then so I guess I'll explain the other one. The other one that I have heard, um, I don't remember where I've heard it, but the other one that I've heard is that it's more of like a status thing where the sin that you're committing is against an infinite God, and so because you are committing sin against an infinite God, therefore it makes sense that the punishment is infinite. Um, So I kind of have the same issue with both of those explanations. Um, it's not that I would call them unbiblical, as in like they go against the Bible, but I would call them non-biblical. And what I mean by non-biblical is I have trouble seeing biblical evidence either for or against those ideas in the Bible. It just really seems to me like that idea doesn't seem to be in the heads of the biblical writers. Now, that being said, what I am about to propose is almost in no way, shape, or form in the heads of the biblical writers either. So I can't really, right? I am in no way trying to say that the biblical writers had this idea in their heads. That my asymptotic view. That now that doesn't mean that my view is wrong. It doesn't mean that those views are wrong. Um, for that, uh, I just think that it's hard to say that it's there. Um, but it does seem to. Oh, is that what happened last time? Yes, stay in the call. Um, i- interesting. Interesting. Maybe it kicked me out of the call last time. Okay, I gotta be aware of that. All right. Um, okay. So that's the traditionalist view. So the conditionalist view, which is uh sort of the new kid on the block, is that um eternal life. And so I guess by this definition, consciousness, uh, an eternal consciousness is conditional, um, and is only granted by God. And you can already tell my why I don't agree with the equivocation that life equals consciousness. Um, and so you can already see that I don't really agree a lot with conditionalists, but I think that they have some good points. Um, the conditionalists see hell really as the fire burning something up and the fire burning up the person. And so they think that hell is bad, but they think that it is finite in duration, um, and therefore it is finite in punishment. Um, Most of the things that I see from conditionalists is arguing over this point, um, trying to argue against the biblical data, well, rather, that's a bad way of wording it. They're trying to utilize biblical data to against the traditionalists to argue that hell is finite in duration in the sense of the act of it. Um, uh, Now, they will say that it is infinite in duration in the effect. So, like, basically, you'll be dead forever is the way that I think I've heard kind of Chris State put it. Um, uh, but what you won't really hear them talking about much. I mean, they will mention it, but they kind of take this for granted. The fact that it is finite in punishment, as in like uh, you're punished accurately for the finite amount of sin that you are taken or that you commit in life. And so, and I kind of understand why they do that. They sort of take this for granted. Um, and I think that's why a lot of I think that the finite and punishment is why a lot of conditionalists like the conditionalist view, because it seems to match our moral intuitions. Um, and so basically, what my view hopes to do is to sort of marry these two together. What I see as good biblical data for infinite in duration with the moral intuitions about that the punishment should be finite in um, that the punishment should be finite to match the sin that was committed in life. Okay, so uh, one of the things that I don't really go over here, but um, I think that it would be fair to kind of calculate and model punishment as being roughly equal to your level of consciousness about the punishment uh, versus time you spend experiencing that punishment. Um, and obviously, like this can make sense. Like if you touch a hot stove, um, that's going to bring a certain amount of pain and suffering, but it will be less pain and suffering than if you were to just stick your entire hand on the stove and leave it there for like 5 minutes. Right? That it's two different levels of punishment and pain, right? Um, so, but also you could think that if I wasn't, if I'm not consciously aware, so let's say, right, being asleep probably doesn't work good for this example. But let's say either I am heavily sedated or let's just say I'm straight up dead. My conscious awareness is gone. If you then put my hand on that stove, um, the level of punishment and pain and suffering that I will experience is going to go down a lot because I'm not consciously aware of it happening. Now, there might still be some, but my conscious awareness is a lot lower of it. And if I never come out of it, like in this example, like let's say I'm dead, you would maybe just say that I didn't experience anything. And actually, you'll hear a lot of people say, like, okay, well, therefore, it doesn't matter what we do to a dead body because the person's not experiencing it anyway. So we have this intuition, I think, already that um, punishment is some kind of combination of conscious awareness of that punishment and the time duration that we spend. There might be other factors in there, but for this, I feel like this is enough. Um, so if we plot a chart, oh, that says chat. If we plot a chart where the x-axis is time and the y-axis is consciousness, the equation 1 over x gives us a rough, I should say rough model, because I'm going to end up changing it. Gives us a rough model for how an asymptotic view would work. As time goes on for eternity, the level of consciousness would diminish, would continually diminish or wane, but it would never reach zero. So as you go on infinitely, this line here will never reach zero. It will constantly be going on, it will constantly getting less and closer and closer to zero, but it will never actually reach zero. The asymptote, right? That's why it's the asymptotic view. The asymptote is at y equals zero. If we take punishment to be conscious awareness of that punishment over time, then a function of total punishment would look like an integral of our consciousness equation, right? So this is our rough consciousness equation. It's not going to stay like this because this, for various reasons. uh, so we will augment that equation slightly in order to match what I think is going on. We will replace x with x plus 1. That way, that way it is shifted over by 1. So we'll take this whole graph and we'll shift it over by 1, right? You can see that happening here. Um, so this line actually goes up. I've deleted it for this case, but we're shifting this whole line up. That way we don't have this also going off into eternity, and we can actually then integrate from, it's possible then to integrate from zero off to infinity. We'll also have to make this the power of this x a little bit higher, which is why I will end up replacing with k. Um, this okay, so we'll shift it over by 1, but that will be making our consciousness range between 0 and 1, which seems representative to me of putting human consciousness between 0% or between 100% and 0%, right? So if you think of your level of conscious awareness as a percentage, right, with 1 being 100% and 0 being 0%, you might start off hell at 100% aware of it, but as you're getting kind of burnt up and going through that process of hell, you continuously diminish. Um, It might be arguable that a higher consciousness should give a value of 100%, but I don't think that anyone thinks that that will be taking place in hell, right? Maybe in heaven we get to 100% or something greater than 100% level of consciousness, but who knows? We're in speculation territory. I think for hell, this is good enough. Also, let's represent 1 over x as x to the negative 1. Unfortunately, x to the negative 1 does not converge. However, if we replace x to the negative 1 with x to the negative k, where k is greater than 1, right? So it can be any value, right? Not equal to 1, but any value greater than 1. The function will converge for all possible k. I hope that my math is correct on that. I did this yesterday, so I might be wrong on that, but I tested it on Wolfram Alpha, and it seemed to work. This makes our final model for hell f of x equals x plus 1 to the power of negative k, where x is greater than 0 and k is greater than 1. This makes our function of total punishment the integral of f of x from 0 to infinity. So the area under this curve, right, which is what an integral is, it's the area under this curve, is basically representative of the total amount of punishment. What this means is that we now have a model of hell that is infinite in duration and yet finite in punishment, and punishment dispensed. Uh, so we get to have our infinite in duration, but finite in punishment. So we now have a view of hell that seems to match our biblical data, but also match our moral intuitions. Um, this model assumes a constant level of punishment applied to consciousness over that time. Some might argue against that point, but you could also apply an alternating level of punishment, and it would still work with this model of consciousness. So, what I mean by that is rather than kind of 1 over x here, you could replace that 1 with like any finite number. So like say a, right? I might want to put like an a term um in front, or an I term. Let's call it I. I'm kind of thinking of k as, so k is the rate of decay. And so I kind of jokingly refer to that as like a karma value, right? So like um you could think of it as the higher that k is, the quicker your rate of decay. So you could think of it as a goodness indicator. So like if you're really good, but you're not saved, and you're not a Christian, um, your K value will be a lot higher. And so your rate of decay will be very quick. And so your time and overall level of punishment that your time of severe conscious torment um, will be a lot quicker in hell. And so you'll decay a lot faster. And so the amount of so your punishment will still be infinite in duration, but the overall amount of punishment that you'll experience will be less the higher your k value is. You could also have this with this I value that I just added here. With We could think of that as like intensity. Um, that wouldn't change the rate of decay, but it would change the amount of your punishment. Um, uh, I'm not married to those to that I term being in there. But if someone did have a problem with it for some reason, I'm not sure exactly what. I don't know. Maybe Hitler has a really high I value here or something. I don't know. But those would obviously be the terms that you know God would be assuming that this kind of equation is right. The I and the K would be the values that God would be determining for uh, modeling a person's time in hell. Um, but that's basically it. Um, uh, I hope to whenever I actually write my thesis to have sections where I talk about biblical data, which I think supports this, and I do think that there is biblical data to support this understanding, but it wouldn't be this understanding specifically. It would be more of basically every single time I hear biblical data in support of either of these views, to me, they just really seem to be supporting a view that's something like this. Um, Now, I am not trying to say that this was in the heads of the biblical writers and that they were thinking about it this way. I have very little I don't really think that that's the case. Um, but I don't think that that means that this is wrong. I think that this maps on quite well to the biblical data, and I hope that this view can also help settle a little bit of the argument that goes on between these about the definition of death. And I really see the current discussion about being the definition of death being non existence versus separation. Non existence kind of mapping onto the conditionalist view, separation mapping onto the traditionalist view. I agree more with the separation model. But I think that um, this view can also kind of give us a slightly altered definition, which is cessation of activity while retaining a degradation of identity. And I hope to talk about that more in my actual paper. I have a paragraph on that there with um, death of death, defining consciousness as discrete versus continuous. I think that's the main thing that my view does. I think both of these views treat consciousness as discrete, and I don't think that that maps on to what we really understand about reality. It really seems to be that consciousness is more continuous. I hope to bring Jonathan Pageau and John Vervaeke into this discussion because they have made some recent stuff about just some videos, really. But Vervaeke probably has some academic work that I hope to, or can hope that he can direct me to some academic work about consciousness being continuous. In my view, really treats. I mean, you couldn't get this smooth curve if we didn't treat consciousness as continuous. Um, yeah, but I think that's all I want to say for now. Just wanted to get this made to get this out there. And just because I have these ideas going around in my head. I don't know of anybody else that has these ideas, and I hope to share this view with people. That way, I don't have to constantly being or constantly explaining this to people. So there we go. Let's end the recording there. All right.